listening.
Good morning and welcome to David's Pick on America's Web Radio. And I decided, since I am a cowboy of sorts, clodbusters more like it, that I'd play a little music that we all appreciate from the past. So anyway, we're glad to have you listening, and this is going to be a very special show. I want to thank Colonel Rick White, retired Colonel White, for lining us up with what I think is these guys have just are incredible, and since I was a little kid I followed the Blue Angels, and we have Captain retired Donnie Cochran on the line with us this morning, and he was a commander of the Blue Angels, as a matter of fact, and he's done just a little bit of everything, I guess, in the military at one time or the other, or not in the military, but in the Navy. And I believe yesterday when we were talking, Captain Cochran, you said that you had 800 postage stamp landings. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have 888 to be exact.
But who's counting?
That's exactly correct. And I got to tell you, about a third of them were at night, and those landing at night are always the ones that are the most challenging and require the most focus and determination to get back aboard.
Well, I tell you, when I was flying, or when I was taking lessons anyway, like my instructor said, any landing you walk away from is a good one, and the definition of a plane landing is a controlled crash. And I don't know what it is. In my opinion, a plane landing on a postage stamp, better known as an aircraft carrier, is a landing by a nut. And, I mean, the thought of doing something like that. And let me ask, and there are a lot of questions I'm sure our listeners, they can certainly listen to us live on Facebook. If they want to make a comment, they can send a comment in, and we'll get it and ask the question. But I can't imagine landing on an aircraft carrier, and even it's sort of like jumping out of a good plane. I don't want to jump out of a perfectly good plane, and why would I want to land on a postage stamp?
Well, I got to tell you, Dave, first of all, let me say that I'm very, very glad to be here. And by the way, that's the title of my book, Glad to Be Here. And that phrase is an expression of gratitude for the journey that allowed you to get to where you are, and the determination and effort that it requires you to stay there. So I am truly glad to be here discussing with you, which is in line with my next chapter in life, which is sharing the unique aspects of what I had a chance, and what many others had a chance to do, being a part of the United States Navy aviation team as well as the Blue Angel teams. But to get back to your question about what it took to get aboard an aircraft carrier, the focus required, well, the first thing, it doesn't happen overnight. That's for sure.
No.
It is a process that you go through, and training that number one, help you gain the confidence that you can do it. Number two, the required skills required to go out and do it safely and consistently. That is the key. If you want to go out there and try it one time, you might be lucky and be successful. But if you want to be consistently able to go and perform in very demanding conditions, then you have to have a certain experience level, training, and confidence behind you to make that consistently. And the way the Navy and Marine Corps team trains, it prepares you well for those challenges, to meet and exceed those challenges.
Donnie, has the simulator helped in that aspect?
Absolutely. One quick story on the simulators. Almost every aircraft that I flew in the Navy, I had simulator experience prior to actually flying the airplane. Number one, the simulators are so good today with the level D type training where it simulates the environment you're actually flying in. The visuals are almost exactly what you would see in the real world. So the training helps keep the cost down and to allow you to do it safely before you get on a real airplane, real expensive aircraft that it takes to operate. The cost of aircraft are hundreds of millions of dollars. So when you entrust that tool to a pilot today, you want to make sure that he is, number one, well-trained. He or she is well-trained to be able to go out and safely operate and employ the aircraft as a weapon system that it may be designed to be utilized as. So the simulators are vitally important to achieving the level of expertise prior to actually touching the real airplane.
Did you ever have an experience where you were coming into a carrier and it was like deja vu all over again because of the simulation?
Well, I got to tell you, the newer simulators are much better than the ones I had. But I can tell you the F-14 simulator that I had a chance to fly, and that's the aircraft I have most of my experience in. It was not quite at the level that will allow you to. In other words, it was a lot more. If you could land it in the simulator, you could certainly do it in the real airplane because it was the visuals were lagging what the aircraft was actually doing, and so when you were trying, you ended up playing sort of a game with the simulator, which you can't really do in the airplane. You have to react to and anticipate what the real conditions are telling you in order to safely land the aircraft on board. So to answer your question, yes, there have been times where the simulator reminded me when I was in the air of the real deal, especially when it's extremely dark at night, where the only visual references you have is your instruments in the airplane and the little lights that you may see on the carrier. And so
way off in the horizon.
That's exactly correct. Now, there are times when the weather is such that as you're making your approach, you will not see the ship until several seconds before you break out and land the aircraft. Very rarely does that happen, but it does happen, and that's when you have to be on your A game to make sure you safely get aboard the ship.
Just talking about it, it makes one, or makes me nervous anyway. I can't address other folks, but I just, is there anything, would you always prefer a day landing as to a night landing?
Well, it's a lot of the combat operations are conducted at night. So you have to get very comfortable flying the airplane in the night environment.
Mm-hmm.
But naval aviation has been around for, well over almost 100 years. And I can tell you, maybe over 100 years, I have to check. But the bottom line is, over the years, we've learned what it takes to safely operate and to be proficient in current. So the way it works is if you have not flown a night landing in 7 days, you have to go in the daytime before you go at night. And the reason for that is it's a proficiency thing. And not necessarily currency. You could be flying all, for several days, weeks. But if you haven't flown at night, that is the proficiency part that you have to have linked up with your currency in order to consistently go out and land the aircraft safely. So you always want to make sure that you were, let's say, proficient. But to answer your question, yeah, you would love to be able to go out and fly mostly day. However, to get the full appreciation for flying in naval aviation, you certainly have to fly at night. And now we have this phrase called pinky recoveries and commander moons. And what that means is a pinky recovery is just before sunset. It's like twilight. and you still have a little light left that you have a horizon, and it counts as a night landing. So a lot of people love to fly at those times, that twilight time, just before sunrise or sunset is a good time to get out. Now, the other time is when you have a full moon. I can tell you, Navy pilots all over the world are enjoying it because it provides that little bit of light that gives you a horizon and able to, it's almost as good as flying in daytime, but not quite. It's always a challenge to fly at night.
Okay, and I'm going to back up a little bit on this interview, and that who are we talking to? We're talking to Captain Donnie Lee Cochran, who was commanding officer, CO of the Blue Angels, and obviously a veteran. Also is an inductee. Was inducted into the Georgia Military Hall of Fame back in 2016, or he was in the class of 2016, and he has. What have you not flown, as far as jets go?
Well, I've flown a variety of now in the military or in the Navy. I flew mostly tactical airplanes. I mean, it started off in the T-28, which was the basic prop train plane. The T-2 Buckeye, which was a basic trainer, jet trainer. The TA-4, which was the advanced jet trainer. All of these aircraft have been since retired. And then I went from there to the F-8 Crusader, which was a single-engine, high-performance fighter that was converted to a reconnaissance airplane. And then I went to the F-14 as a fighter pilot. Also, we had a reconnaissance pod that took over the mission from the from the F-8. And then eventually I had a chance to fly the F-18. The F-18, my experience in F-18 was from the Blue Angels. Now, one thing you said, I was the commanding officer of the Blue Angels for about 18 months, from 95, most of 96. And then prior to that, though, I had 3 years on the team as a demonstration pilot. So I was very fortunate to be selected in 1985 for the 86, 87, and 88 season. In 86, we were flying the A-4 Skyhawk. In 1987, the team transitioned to the F-18 to accommodate the transition in an air show in the same season. We froze the team. In other words, the Diamond pilots were frozen in place, which meant we got an extra year. Somebody had to do it, broke my heart, but I was happy to accommodate that. So the second year I flew in 87, the first year of the F-18 in 1988, my last year as a demo pilot, I flew the number 4 position. So I flew 3 for 2 years, 4 for 1 year, and 1 for 18 months. So out of the 6 flying positions, I had a chance to fly 3 of them. And as a result of that, I learned some really unique things about my own limitations and strengths. I learned some things about leadership and team building and self-accommodation or accountability, I should say. All of those great qualities that make up a great organization, you learn in that test case, that very pressure cooker environment. You learn so much about yourself and others. And so that's essentially what my next chapter is about. But to get back to your other question, what aircraft I haven't flown, well, after I left the Navy, I got out and I worked for UPS, and I was hired on as a flight engineer. I flew the DC-8 as a flight engineer, and then I went from there to a 727 engineer, and then I went into the management and became a captain on a 727, and from there I went to Coca-Cola, had an opportunity to fly a G5, I think it was a G5, and I got simulator trained in the G550, and that's the extent of my aviation experience.
Wow. We're going to take a quick break here, Donnie, and we'll be back with you in about 2 minutes. And you're listening to America's Web Radio. We've got Captain Donnie Lee Cochran on, experience and flying with the Blue Angels. And when we come back, I want to talk about my experience with the Blue Angels. And these guys are some of the nicest folks I think you'll ever meet, and I'm sure Donnie will say the same thing. We'll be back on America's Web Radio right after this.
Your auto love and investment demands the best, and for 45 years, Passport Transport has been meeting those demands. From manufacturers to the one-car collectors and all other facets of the auto industry and antique auto hobby.
Donnie, we doing okay?
We're doing great.
Good. I think I mentioned to you, we had my family and I had the privilege of going to one of your all's practice sessions in Pensacola, and it was just absolutely fantastic watching you all. And I just...
Well, I certainly have a lot of great memories about that experience flying with the team, that's for sure.
I'm sure. Okay, we're going to play this, and then we'll be coming back.
Okay, no problem.
Family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser. You need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the americasbroadcastnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on David's Pick, and we have retired Captain Donnie Lee Cochran on the line with us today. And Donnie was one of the Blue Angels and did his thing with the Blue Angels, and then also I believe you were in Iraq as well. Donnie, is that?
Well, let's put it this way. I was flying the F-14 in 1992 and 93, and this was in between the first Gulf War and the second one. And but what we had a chance to do was we had a chance to fly the no-fly zone when it was in force before the second Gulf War.
Mm-hmm.
We were flying the F-14 to enforce those no-fly zones over southern Iraq. And so that's the extent of the exposure to a potential hostile environment that I had. During the Gulf War, I was actually in Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama, going through Air War College.
Oh.
And it was a relatively short war, so the only thing that we had a chance to do was to go and actually fly the no-fly zone, and that was in 92 and 93.
Okay, and what I started to mention earlier was and correct me if I'm wrong, because I certainly don't keep up with it like maybe I should or maybe I shouldn't, but anyway, we had the opportunity. We were in Pensacola and just doing some vacation time, and somebody said, well, you ought to during the day look up and you'll see the Blue Angels, or if you want to go out to so-and-so field, you can go out and watch them as they are practicing, getting ready to go into their season. And that was, both sons and my wife and I, it was so enjoyable. It was just absolutely a thrill to watch, and you're standing there with your head cocked back watching you guys, and what is it? Was it a C-130 that?
Yes.
Okay.
We call it Fat Albert. It's the C-130 transport, and that is the team primary support aircraft, and it is used to fly the maintenance team as well as the support requirements to the various air show sites. There are some airfields that may not have the level of support that the team needs, and if that's the case, they will bring in certain support items to make sure that they have what they need to operate effectively. But you mentioned the practices over NAS Pensacola. The team practices probably 3 to 4 times a week. In fact, the only no-fly day typically is a Monday. That is a day that if we do a weekend show and return to Pensacola, well, Monday is a day off, the time to sort of do expense reports and, catch up on any correspondence you need to do, administrative tasks. Tuesday, you normally have a practice, and there is an airfield located about 40 miles from Pensacola that the team typically go and fly and do practice shows. Wednesday, they will have typically a practice show over Naval Air Station, Pensacola. And it may be twice a month. I'm not sure how many times they do it now. But you would do a practice over the field, which is, realistic. It's the best type training you can get. And then on Thursday, the team will transition or fly to the new air show site. When they arrive, they will do circle and arrival type maneuvers, picking up checkpoints. And then they will actually do a second flight, which is the fly practice show there. Friday morning, the team would go to either a school. A school is in session. If it's not, it could be a community center, a hospital, and just make good ambassador-type visit to the community in which we fly. And then on Saturday and Sunday, you have your air show.
Wow.
And that's a typical week for the team. It's a very grueling schedule, but in January or December of the year prior to the air show, you sort of know what your schedule is going to be. And they built in some more downtime so that the team is not burning themselves out with a grueling schedule. But it's a wonderful way of representing the armed forces of the U.S., of the United States military, because a lot of places you go, you represent all branches of service, not just the Navy and Marine Corps, but all branches. And it is a great opportunity to showcase how well your military, your tax dollars are being spent. And so I always think it's a wonderful way, especially at the military airfields where normally there's no fee to come in. And even if there is, it's normally a charity type event. But it's a great way of seeing what your military training is about, to stay in touch with the military. And that's probably the reason why you won't have a military that would try to take over the country, because it represents basically the people within the country, and it's a great thing.
When did you decide you wanted to join the Blue Angels or go try? I guess you try out for it, or you how? I'm too old and too scared, so I couldn't do it anyway. But some grandparent that's listening and his grandson wants to fly and wants to become a part of the Blue Angels or one of the other teams, how do you do it?
Well, for me, I was sort of a late bloomer, you might say. In other words, I didn't have an opportunity to see the Blue Angels until much later in my life. So I was not exposed to them at a very early age. What I was exposed to at an early age was naval aviation. I grew up on a farm in Pelham, Georgia, and on this farm they had, let's say, I think navigation routes, because I used to see Navy airplanes, Air Force, Army aircraft, Marine, all flying low, fast, and that inspired me to pursue aviation. After I got my wings, I went to Naval Air Station Miramar, and the Blue Angels had an air show at Miramar. And that inspired me. That one air show inspired me to pursue that potential opportunity to be a part of that very special organization. And but how do you do it? You certainly have to have a desire and an aspiration to fly. And then there is a journey associated with getting to a point where you could actually apply or qualify for it. But if it's a dream you have, I'll be the first person to tell you to pursue your dreams, because I was very fortunate to be selected twice with the Blue Angels, and that's just like lightning striking the same spot twice. It very rarely happens. But like I said, it was a journey, and it was a process, and recognizing opportunities when they present themselves. For myself, I applied twice the first time, and I was not selected the first time. And I feel, that defensive mechanism kick in. And I was like, well, I'm a little disappointed, but, And then I almost had decided that I was not going to reply the second time, but I got a let's say, an idea that I could be a part of it. In other words, you have these intuitions that all of us have, and mine was stimulated by a conversation between my department head when I was flying in VF-213 and the boss of the Blue Angel. They were talking about the selection from the last year where I was not selected. And they mentioned that, hey, my timing was off and that I should reconsider. And the minute I heard that, I immediately called the applicant officer and asked him what I needed to do to be an active applicant for the 1980-16. And this is 1985. And of course, when you get those intuition, you have to act on them. You can't just sit back and cross your fingers and hope things happen. You have to be very proactive about pursuing and intentional about pursuing your dream and doing the things necessary to build a positive reputation, being very good at what you do, having a great attitude, developing great interpersonal skills so you can talk to people and communicate with people that may not necessarily be like you. All of those type skills were part of the process of getting you to that point where you have a chance to apply. And then after that, it's some of it is a little luck, and some of it is your ability to bring the values and qualities that particular team is looking for that year.
Incredible. I was watching a special on the Blue Angels, and the amount of training that you all do, like you kept saying, the team, and even to the point that the leader that's calling the balls and strikes at 3,000 feet or 2,000 feet or 500 feet, that you all train together so much that the other members can, they get so used to your voice and the way you will say something that they know, it's just a voice recognition of what's about to happen.
You're absolutely right. The way you're able to fly 36 inches wingtip canopy is you basically have to anticipate what is going to happen in order to stay synchronized with the leader. And having flown for 3 years as a wingman, I was fortunate to have the same flight leader all 3 of those years. But what was really neat was the consistency in which the leader had to communicate over the radios, and the energy required, the positive energy. That's what I talk about a lot, and that is not only do you have to be consistent with your voice, but is there a uplifting emotional tone with it that can enhance the performance of the individual, particularly when there is challenges going on, when it's very challenging and rough conditions. Having that confident, energized voice gives that energy to keep ahead of the aircraft so that you can anticipate what you need to do. So you're right. As flight leader, you always, in fact, I still remember some of those calls that I had to make as flight leader. And let's say if you were going left, you would say coming left, and then you coming left. At the end of left, you move a little pull, the P and pull. You actually start pulling back on the aircraft, adding power. The P and power, you start adding power on the aircraft, and you had to be consistent with that so that everybody can anticipate and stay synchronized with the leader.
Just incredible.
But yeah, let me share this part. You mentioned one of the most critical aspects of building an effective organization or team is feedback, and we call it debrief. And after every air show, you had a debrief.
Mm-hmm.
And you would go into the debrief, and you would have to be honest about your assessment of your performance. And if you were like 4 or 5, then you and the maintenance, the people that actually critiqued the air show was the flight surgeon and the maintenance officer. So there were non-aviators, but they were the ones that critiqued how well the maneuvers went, and they were talking about maneuvers. They didn't talk about necessarily individuals, but they were talking about maneuvers. The maneuver was 300 feet left of center point. There was curl and number 3 performance. That's the type of feedback that they gave you, and it enabled you to, number one, continue to be a proficient and pursue that perfect air show that the team has never flown, and it helped you to keep the show safe as well. But the debrief was incredibly important for sustainable high performance. And what was interesting was when I first, as a new pilot, you're always getting more than your fair share of feedback. And so what I had to develop was I had to develop a mentality of, well, how can I consistently go in, 6 days a week and getting that kind of feedback? If it was not good, it could beat you up. So I had to develop a mentality about, well, how do I do that? So the first thing I did was I said to myself, it was important for me to accept all feedback and criticism without taking it personally. Because if you let it get to you, then you would become your own worst enemy. So the next thing you learn is sometimes your feedback comes camouflage with resentment and hurt feelings and a whole bunch of garbage. Your task is to discard all of that stuff and choose those golden nuggets that apply to you and take ownership for those gaps that you have to improve your performance. And the last thing I learned was sometimes your feedback is not credible. Like the internet sometimes. But anyway, you have to just learn to discard that and just keep focused on taking ownership of those things that you have to do. And it's those type of lessons learned. Keep in mind, I had almost 5 years of that. And in order to be able to sustain yourself, because a lot of it could be good. A lot of it is going to be, areas where you need to improve, some gaps. And so I learned those type techniques.
Donnie, we're going to have to stop there for a minute and take a break. We'll be back with Captain Donnie Lee Cochran from Pelham, Georgia, and that's why he's a good Georgia boy, and that's how he got in the Georgia Hall of Fame. And we'll talk a little bit about that and what that meant to him right after this.
Quick Steaks. That's Q-U-I-K Steaks.
And now he's a Florida boy down there on the farm.
Well, actually, I am right now on my farm now as we're doing this interview. So this is great.
Oh, it's if the government hadn't gotten so involved, I'd still be farming. But they got all over farming when I got out of it, or they were all over it when I got out.
There's a few family farms still out there, and you to farm today, you probably can't do it just with farming activities. You have to have probably a secondary source of income.
Yeah.
And I mean, working at Coca-Cola and working at UPS and being in the military, all of those things allowed me to have money to be able to invest in the farm. So
Okay. We're coming back.
Okay.
And we're back on David's Pick on America's Web Radio, and we certainly appreciate you listening. And I want to throw this out: how much we appreciate the veterans, and want to tip my hat and thank over and over again Rick White, Colonel Rick White, that's heads up the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. And if you haven't gone to it, please take the time to look it up and go to it. And if you can afford it, send them a little contribution. We're going to be starting a program here at the radio station very shortly, and we're going to donate half of our proceeds from this to the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. And even Colonel White, I haven't talked to him about it yet, but we're going to do it, and look forward to being able to contribute to it. And our guest today, Captain Cochran, was inducted into the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. Being a Georgian, I think that's one of the main qualifications, is being a Georgian. And then outstanding service and valor and on and on. And Captain Cochran, just to think of flying at how many knots, and I used to be able to do it in my head, but I can't do it anymore. Taking knots and turning them into miles per hour. How?
Well, there is this one maneuver that we flew called double farvel, and the double farvel was where number 1 and number 4 fly upside down.
Mm-hmm. And cross each other.
Well, actually, we were flying. Number 4 is flying formation off of 1 as we're flying. It's a 4-plane formation, and it's demonstrating the skills of the diamond formation. But you were talking about knots. We flew this maneuver at 380 knots, which is equivalent to 437 miles per hour. So it takes I think it's about 1.3 miles per hour for every knot. So in other words, knots are slower in terms of, it's a lower number. They're the same speed, but a lower number. In other words, it takes more miles per hour to make a knot. So 1.3, somewhere around there, miles per hour for every knot. So 380 knots is equivalent to 437 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one way to look at it.
And
but you were asking, well, how fast do we typically fly maneuvers? Well, for the 6 and 4 plane formation, you normally won't see more than about 380 knots. Certain maneuver, you'll see 400 knots. Now, number 5 and 6, they will demonstrate the maximum capability of the aircraft. So they could be up 600 knots plus. The limitation for them is to stay below supersonic. And so, but for the diamond formation, since it's precision flying, we don't necessarily have to show the real aggressive speeds, high speeds, although we have certain maneuvers that are done at 400 knots. Most of them are right around 400 and below for the 4-plane formation. For the 5-plane, for the 2, 5, and 6, they may be a little faster. Certain maneuvers, they'll be faster.
And again, correct me if I'm wrong. One of the persons that critiques, isn't he also the announcer?
The narrator focuses primarily on narration.
Okay.
Very seldom will he give a critique because number one, he's in his first year. He's going to eventually get in that formation. So but he's not in a position to really critique because he hadn't been trained necessarily. And plus, his focus is on narrating the air show, not necessarily critiquing the air show.
And
so, go ahead.
Out of all the formations that you all fly, which do you think, in your opinion, was the most difficult?
I have to break that down to certain maneuvers. The most difficult maneuver that I flew as a number 3 pilot was the left echelon roll. And what that was the 4 aircraft stacked down on the left wing of the airplane, and the number 1 pilot turning left into the formation and doing a roll. And that was probably the most demanding maneuver to consistently fly on a day in and day basis. We eventually eliminated that maneuver and brought in another because it was not really appreciated by the crowd. It was a lot of hard work for the demo pilots, but it was not necessary. It was like, one of those go sleeper maneuvers. But the skills required to execute it were just incredible. So that was the most difficult. One of the more exciting maneuvers was the vertical break. And this is where all 4 planes come up and they do a breakout maneuver and go in 4 different directions. It's like a bomb burst maneuver.
Mm-hmm.
And that's relatively easy maneuver to fly. But, like I said, it was always a pleasure to do maneuvers such as that.
As I recall, too, when we were watching in Pensacola, don't you all land together?
Well, in the A4s, I'm glad you brought that up. Now, in the F-18, I think we typically will do individual landings. They were concerned about landing gear problems. We, at one time, when we first transitioned to the F-18, we were doing 3-plane landings, and then we went to 1-plane landings. But in the A4, I was very fortunate to be one of the few pilots that have done 6-plane takeoffs and 6-plane landings. And the reason for that is the airplane was small enough that you can consistently get 6 airplanes all on the same runway. There's nothing like having a landing or takeoff with metal all around you. You're depending on everybody executing at the highest level to safely land and take the aircraft off. Very seldom that we take off all 6 planes, but we did it a couple of times. And it was amazing. It's one of the things I can always look back and talk about.
Wow.
and be here to talk about it.
And exactly. Oh.
Well, I have one other thing I want to cover, and that is I want to cover the next chapter.
Sure.
And I mean, there are so many veterans that are out there, and we look at the challenges facing our country today. We bring so much to the table, and that the country really needs in terms of just the skills and collaboration, all those things that make an organization, that make a country strong. A lot of our veterans bring back. So for me, my next chapter is making sure that I have an opportunity to share the unique aspects of what I had a chance to do, being a part of not just the Blue Angels, but even Coca-Cola, UPS, all of these great organizations that all have these great values and that help, form organizations that are cohesive, that work effectively together. And so my next chapter is to do more of that. And my challenge is I'm asked to do talks a lot. Most people want, if I wanted to talk every day, I probably could. But then I need to be able to sustain that. There are organizations that, like law enforcement, I do a lot of work for law enforcement, with schools, with nonprofits, and with women-led organizations. Those organizations, I believe, form the pillars of a strong community. And so for law enforcement, I've talked to, like the Georgia Highway Patrol. I've talked to them several times. Atlanta Police Department, I talked to them. The Atlanta Police Academy, one of the sheriff departments, I had a chance to talk to them. From the education standpoint, I've done Georgia Tech and Morehouse ROTC unit. Let me get that real quick. Sorry about that. That was my alarm. But anyway, I that's what I believe my next chapter. There's a reason why I survived, those 888 carrier landings, flying air shows and flying maneuvers, inverted. I wasn't survive all that to sit on the farm here and look. Although I'm on the farm right now, it's a wonderful thing to do. But I believe it's about giving back and making a difference, making a meaningful difference in the lives of others. And if I can consistently do that, not only am I going to live my life better, but I think I will have an impact on others as well. So that is my next chapter. And I think all veterans, and all of us really, we have to be thinking, okay, what's next for us? What is it that I can do to make a positive difference in the lives of others? There are plenty of people that are going to throw stone at you and say, this and that, but what are you doing positively to make a difference? And some of us can't do much. If you can't do much, start with your family and make sure that they're taken care of and that they're living life to the fullest. And I believe that is my next chapter, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
That's a beautiful statement, and so many people overlook it. But we have a good friend, Bruce Cowie, that has written a book called Vietnam to Western Airlines, and which turned into Delta Airlines. And he was a pilot in Vietnam, and just like you mentioned, in civilian life, you've been a pilot for large corporations, and it all, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of it came from your military background and experience, and you went from one jet to another jet. And I think this is, you're asking about what we can give back. I'm just a poor country boy from Texas, and that's why I'm doing this show, and why I've got the station, and I've got one flag up on the wall in front of me and one in the flag position of the fold. And I love the military. I love my son's in the military, and
one thing you just reminded me of, and that is, I think one of the reasons why military people are more inclined to, not all of us, but a lot of us are more inclined to really appreciate the country more, not only because we serve, but we have an opportunity to go all over the world. And, I mean, I've been to Australia, to Dubai, to South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, places in Europe. And, I all of that travel, at the end of the day, you know what? I always wanted to go home, back to the USA. I love traveling. I love going overseas and getting these checks in the blocks and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, there's no place better than home. And so I think that is a big driver in a lot of military is, hey, we see what's out there. We see what the opportunity. We also see how well the world is catching up. In some cases, passing us. But there's no place greater than this country. And if you appreciate that, then you want to make sure that for your kids and your grandkids that they have that opportunity too. And so that means there's a lot of work, but I think we're resilient people and we can make it happen.
Well, I'm like you, and from the standpoint, just like you were saying when you were flying with the Blue Angels, the debriefings, and the critiquing, so forth and so on. And I'll be the first to say that the United States isn't perfect, but I don't want anybody complaining or anybody criticizing the United States. We've got our faults, and we work on them, and we try to change it. But for some of these people today that are saying some of the most outlandish things I've ever heard, you know, I don't like it, and that's part of what the station is about. We counter those people that, you know, I'm a real believer in been there, done that, and, you know, until you've walked in my moccasins, then you have no right to tell me what to do. And I personally feel like no one should be in office, particularly on a national basis, that hasn't served in the military, even if it's only for as a reservist or whatever they serve as. I don't care, but they should have served. They don't know what it's like to have a bullet go past them, to fly at 600 miles an hour or anything else. So I feel like they should serve.
I think you're right. I think some service. Now, I think this too. I think that if you serve, you can also serve in another capacity. There are so many opportunities to serve within the country, like law enforcement a certain way, community type services, non-profits, where you really get a chance to look at the real challenges facing people.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of ways to serve, and I think a lot of us are focused on making that living and not living. And that's the key. The key is there are ways to serve, because a lot of people may not want to go into military, but there are other ways you can serve. And I think I like the idea of a national service, whether it is military or, you know, whatever service they have, Peace Corps, you name it. I think that people, our young people especially, need to have that sense of service
and discipline.
But anyway, I'm almost out of time, I know, but this has been wonderful.
Oh, well, we got a few minutes to go, and have I missed anything, or is there something that, what did it feel like to you? Because the Hall of Fame induction is coming up for the class of 2019 in a couple of weeks, November the 2nd, down in Columbus, Georgia. What was it like for you to be invited and then inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Well, it was, number one, it was an honor to be selected and to be recognized along with so many other great military officers and enlisted that have served from the state of Georgia. That's number one. I was just honored to be a part of an elite group of people like that. And then the other piece is I feel fortunate that I'm relatively active and still can help in terms of spreading the word about not just the Hall of Fame, but about all those other veterans that are from Georgia that may not necessarily be recognized as part of the Hall of Fame, but have contributed so much to the country and to the state. And so to be selected is certainly a honor. But I like to thank all of those veterans out there from Georgia, not just from Georgia, but from all over, but especially from Georgia, that have made this state and made this country what it is.
You know, we mentioned Fat Albert, the backup 130 for you all, and you know, if I were a betting man, I would bet that you would be the first to say that the Blue Angels wouldn't be flying if it wasn't for the support, and that during the Vietnam era, the statement was it takes 5 soldiers behind the one that's up front. Everything from supply up and down the gambit, payroll officer, everything. And, you know, I think like I said, if I were a betting person, I bet you'd be the first one to say that to keep those birds in the air, it takes Fat Albert and that crew working all the time for your best interest to keep those planes in the best condition possible.
That's exactly correct. I have this, when I have a chance to do a talk, I have this phrase I use that says, no one of us is better than the rest of us. And the reason why I put that slide up when I have a chance to talk is a lot of attention is focused on the 6 pilots that are flying the air show. But there's 120 people that actually make the team function.
Wow.
And so even though we may be the person in the flying the jets, the support staff is vitally important for that whole team to operate. So it's important to remember no one of us is better than the rest of us. And if we can sort of keep that, I mean, regardless of what you do, how much money you make or whatever, you are as good as the value you bring to the table, and making sure that not just you are taken care of, but those around you.
That's a beautiful statement. I love that. I hope I can borrow it from you sometime. And it's true. It's true. No matter what size business you're in, what size ship you're on, or anything else, everything is teamwork. And that no one person. I love that. That is fantastic. Donnie, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I hope that I can be presumptuous enough to say we'd sure like to have you back.
Okay, well, we'll have to check on the schedule, and I'm going to have to tell you that being here on the farm and looking out at my trees grow as I'm having this interview is probably an inspiring moment for me. So it probably brought out the best of me.
Well, I think you are the best, and I think the Blue Angels, and it's not just the Blue Angels. What you all represent is everybody that crawls in the cockpit to take care of us, to protect us as civilians, and the sacrifices you've made and the sacrifices that all military has made at one point or the other, giving up part of their family at one point or time, and protecting and securing our borders, securing our country, in making. And I'm just glad that we have the military back up to the strength that it should be. We should be the best in the world, and I think we are. And I lived through the draft and the lottery. That's how old I am. And I think our service people today are absolutely the cream of the crop, without a question. They're the best in the world.
They are, and if I'm about to sign off, I have this phrase I love saying, and one of them is people used to ask me all the time. They said, "Hey," and my call sign when I was in the Navy flying F-14 was Big Time. So they, hey, Big Time, what did it take for you to do what you do? And I said, well, you have to pay the cost to achieve your goals. But I learned that you don't pay the cost to achieve your goals. You enjoy the journey. You pay the cost if you don't figure out how to achieve your goals. You pay the cost if you don't figure out how to have a balance between your work life and your personal life. But you enjoy the cost that it takes for you to achieve a fulfilling life. It's a cost associated when you pay it. And the other thing I learned and this is leading up to my next chapter, and that is you should always have something great to look forward to, and the best is yet to come.
With that,
thank you much.
You're welcome, and thank you for being on with us, Captain Cochran.
of the Blue Angels, and we're going to have Donnie back on in the very near future. Thank you, sir. We're out of time. We're going to put the plug in the jug and move on.
All right, you bet. Thank you so
sir.
much.
Web Radio on the America's Broadcast.
Donnie, that was fantastic.
Thank you for listening.
Um,
This is Ron Camacho.
I hope you